Good evening. This is Coach Randy Nathan. I'm with Project NextGen. Thank you very much for joining us this evening and being part of our free parent workshops. Took a week off last week. Of course, it was Passover and my holiday. If you celebrated Passover, happy Passover. If you celebrated Easter, hope you had a happy Easter. And want to thank you all for joining this call and this webinar focusing on parenting. And tonight's workshop is Parenting in the Age of Disappointment, helping your teen mourn the loss of spring sports, concerts, and musicals. And I live here in New Jersey, and we just found out today that our classes and schools are going to continue to remain closed until May 15th. So we've got a wonderful another 4 weeks left in quarantine, and frankly, it is quite a time to be alive. And I want to thank you all for being here. I do want to let you know that I have my amazing wife, Jessa, working the chat bar. So if there is something you'd like to talk about, a question, a concern, please feel free to type in the chat box, and then I'll make sure that I spend time at the end of our webinar to address them. If not, today's focus is really helping our teens understand the next level. Our first workshop, we focused on parenting the age of fear, helping our teens deal with what we call the new normal. The second one was parenting the age of social media, getting understanding of what our kids are going through in terms of how they embrace social media and the impact of their lives. And tonight's a little bit different. If you are like any and all parents, and especially in particular, if you have a child who's involved with either spring sports, concert, musicals, band, you're undoubtedly experiencing a lot of disappointment that our kids are going through. And in some states, depending where you're calling from, have decided to cancel school all the way through the end of the year. And it's important that we understand what our kids are going through to be better parents. And tonight's workshop is aptly titled, Helping Your Teen Mourn the Loss of Spring Sports. And the agenda for tonight is talking about your teen's identity, the impact of COVID-19, the powerful concept of grief, and then, of course, coming up with some concepts and ideas and strategies about coping with loss. And most importantly, many of your teens, whether it's middle school, high school, or college, is trying to figure out what's my identity. And you might be laughing because you might be a grown adult, your 30s, 40s, even 50s, trying to figure out what is your identity, because are some what we call universal questions. Questions that doesn't matter where you live, where you go, who you are, doesn't matter your race, your creed, your sexual orientation, that are constantly going through our minds in terms of what it means to be alive, in particular right now. First question, of course, being, who am I? And there's different takes on that concept of who am I, why am I here, why was I born? But inevitably, we talk about this concept about who am I? So the next question is, where am I going? And what does it mean to where I'm going? And finally, the third question is, once I know who am I, where am I going, is how am I going to get there? And tonight's conversation is to help teens understand, or help you as parents, help your teens kind of focus on these three core questions. And as we develop our identity and the building blocks of who we are, that first question, who am I, often comes out in middle school. There's a time for us to begin thinking about, it's past grade school, we enter middle school, and it's a question about who am I? You begin to see each other differently. We begin to judge one another. We begin to have this idea about who am I in this world. It begins to play more into our ideas and thoughts. The next question, where am I going, is a question that I was often dealt with in high school. That even though who am I is still prevalent and relevant, in high school, we've been to think about where am I going? And one of the biggest places about where I'm going in high school is I'm going to end up in college, or I'm going to end up in the military. It's the what next steps. And once you start to with who am I, that doesn't usually go away in middle school. It continues through high school. Where am I going picks up in high school. Then finally, for those in college, is how will I get there? Most individuals believe that college is about how I get a job, what's going to be my career, even though those of us who are professors in the world of education focus on the idea of college being education, The impression is that once I figure out who I am and have an idea about where I'm going, college is about how will I get there, what I'm going to do. And these are three very important questions that honestly don't stop after college. They continue. And given our current situation and the coronavirus, COVID-19, being quarantined, I don't know about you, but I'm certainly thinking about this concept about who am I, where am I going, and how I get there, because everything that I thought I knew about life has certainly changed. And I'm an adult. I'm someone who is able to think logically in such a way where I can put things in perspective. Our teens are struggling, and they're reeling with significant frustrations and a number of different emotions. We know that the brain is not fully developed until age 25. And the last part of our brain to fully develop is the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe controls most of our decision-making skills. And as our brain develops in middle school, high school, and college, these are constant components in terms of our brain and what's going to happen. And it's important to understand the biological natures of how we identify ourselves. And so to appreciate ourselves as well as parents, I wanted to take some time to reflect on what we call, I refer to as core identity of teens. If you have had a chance to participate in past workshops, the first one, of course, Parenting in Fear, helping our teens get familiar with the new normal, or last webinar was Parenting and Social Media, helping our understanding what our teens already know. The key piece is peers and just the value that is placed on peers in their life. And that hasn't changed much over the course of generations. That once we get to middle school and high school and colleges, our peer group often takes priority over everything else in our lives, whether it's family, religion, you name it. The peers are the most important part. But tonight's workshop and what our focus is on other core identity of teens, which include sports. Maybe your child participates in marching band, the orchestra, theater, the choir, that our kids' identity is not focused exclusively on being a student, academics. And it's not just about their friends. Nearly 95% of all students participate in some extracurricular outside of academic component that helps create their identity. And for most, these experiences, whether it's sports or music or art, developed many, many years ago when they were younger. And now those components of their life are being threatened. Now, if you have a child who is in college, not only have they transitioned from high school to college, they also have elements of, they may be joined a fraternity or a sorority. And that is a huge part of their identity. And if that was the case, then they are now home, no longer with that sense of connection of their identity of the Greek system. And the other thing is that college brings is that school spirit. And that it doesn't matter if you're an athlete or a member of theater, that going to college events are a big part of what it means to be in college. And those components are obviously being challenged. And those are pieces that are very important in creating the identity of who our teens are. And as you take this core identity, and whether it was sports or marching band and other components, what we're really talking about is this concept of the social identity of your teen, of your child. And we call it socialization. It's also can be referred to as a part of a process that we go through to create our identity. And it begins the moment we are born. And it begins in the hospital based on doctors to decide the socialization process, moving through your family into grade school, into middle school. And who you are matters significantly. And as much as you want to focus on the academics of helping our kids, we cannot help understand the powerful impact of the social identity of other external factors that help create an identity that our teens face. It is sort of like a process where you might refer to as domestication. We are going through a domestication process in order for us to be domesticated into what it means to conform into the social components of being life. And right now, their socialization process of teens, whether it's middle school, high school, or college, has all been upended. The idea is that you're supposed to go to school, get good grades, get into a good college, get a good job, make a lot of money, and be happy. And so if you have a child in middle school right now, that concept is being challenged because they're out of school, they're disconnecting. They're no longer with their friends. They're trying to figure out who they are and what it means to be a pre-adolescent teenager. If your child is in high school, it's being further exacerbated by the idea of their social connections and the next step about getting into college. And if you have a senior, the challenge is even harder because seniors are dealing with the realization that they're not going to have some of those memorable life experiences, whether it might be prom, graduation, or other components of what it means to completely fulfill their role of being a high school student. And if you have a child in college, if they're a freshman, they just got there, this is not what they expected their freshman year. Or if you have anybody who might be even a senior, seniors in high school, seniors in college in particular, are going to have to be, are going to graduate without any big ceremony, without any kind of pomp and circumstances. This time in their life as a senior in college, they're looking for not just internships, they're looking for jobs. There's no career fairs to go to. There's no place to go. There's a significant increase of unemployment. And there's a lot of fear of our college graduates facing that they might not actually have a job after following the blueprint. And so this domestication process, the socialization, is not working as a way it's supposed to and everything they've taught since middle school. And there's two theories I want to bring up in terms of this core identity of teens. First is this concept of attachment theory. Attachment theory is basically the concept that our kids, our teens, have an attachment to a particular identity. So if your child grew up as an athlete, and in many cases it was probably one sport, and as much as you want to have multiple sports, most of our teens play one sport, and they attach themselves, they identify with that sport. They are an athlete, even though they're called the student athlete, they identify first as the athlete. And right now, that component is not there, or they're a musician, or they're a member of the band, they're part of the theater, they're part of the drama, they're part of the musical, or they have concerts, or they have choir. Those are things that are no longer there. And if you've experienced any of your kids in middle school or high school, all of the spring sports have been canceled. All of the musicals and theater have been canceled. And for some, that was their time to shine. That was what made them who they are. And some, in particular, if you're involved with drama, have been studying theater since they were 5 and 6 years old. And these shows are a core component of who they are as a person. And now they're no longer there. They struggle to create an identity about who they are because that attachment is missing. And they're questioning themselves about, who am I? Where am I going? How do I get there? The other concept is by Charles Cooley, which is called the looking glass self. And this has become more prevalent given the nature and times of social media. The looking glass self states that an individual's perception of themselves is based on how they think others perceive them. I'll say that again, it's kind of confusing, but the looking glass self is a theory that based on how people, in particular teens right now, see themselves based on how others perceive them, which is why we discussed a couple of weeks ago in terms of social media being so important. But if your child is an athlete and they identify as an athlete, and now they no longer have that role and facility to place with them, they are very concerned about how others see them as whether or not they are still worthy in value. If they're a musician or they're in theater, they're not out there doing the show, and that component of their life is now missing. And without it, they often think about, well, who am I if I'm not doing a show? Who am I if I'm not playing? And those are very important concepts as parents to understand the overall concept of their socialization process. And yes, there are concerns both psychologically and sociologically how things are going to play out over the course of time. As adults and as parents, we know that things from this point forward will never be the same. We also understand one of the core life principles of being a coach is that change is constant, and we're dealing with significant change. And because of that, we have no idea what the overall consequences are of the choices we make and the choices we're going through and the change we are experiencing. And as a parent, we are concerned because parents love to be in control. And now that things are happening to us and our kids, the socialization process is being impacted by all of these components that are impacting their lives. And so it's important to talk about realistically, openly, about the impact of COVID-19 on teen identity. Now, frankly, I'm not sure the long-term impact. I have some ideas. I have some concerns. I am a sociology professor, and frankly, there's no better lesson in sociology than what is happening currently in our country and around the world. There's no doubt how interconnected we are and how important our connections with each other are and how we must maintain that component. There's no doubt that we are connected globally, not just economically, but as human beings. And for our teens, they're growing up in a world that has just changed literally overnight. And in some situations, if you read the news, there are some colleges claiming they're not going to be open and ready until 2021, which means this year's seniors might have to deal with some really difficult situations, and us as parents have to help them navigate that significant loss and disappointment. Here's some of the stuff that our teens are seeing on a regular basis: closures, cancellations, restaurants are no longer open, schools are closed, rec centers are closed. Yes, even Walt Disney World, Universal Studios, SeaWorld, all these places are closed. And if you look to the right, events, concerts, everything they see in their life is closed, closed, closed. We now are required in many places to walk around with a mask, even if we're just going outside. If you recall, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the sense of fear. This continues to build on fear. And if I'm a teenager, I'm thinking there's a lot of pieces that are going on here in terms of what's going on in life. Who am I? This is not how it's supposed to be. Where am I going? Most importantly, if I'm supposed to get a good education, I'm supposed to get to college or even get a job, how am I going to get there? They're not stupid. Our kids are very, very smart. They see the news. They see the numbers. They know that 20 million individuals have now filed for unemployment. Record numbers in 4 weeks. The gains that we received in terms of economy, in terms of jobs since 2008, over the course of 12 years, have literally dried up over the course of 4 weeks. And for them, they're trying to think, well, does it really matter? What am I supposed to do? What does this mean for our future? And the truth is, here, what are your teens are feeling? They're feeling fear, anxiety. There's very likely your teens are experiencing maybe not so much insomnia, but sleeplessness. Now, certainly part of the problem might be is that they're on social media so late and so long that they're not falling asleep on time. But their sleep patterns are certainly being impacted, or they're having bizarre dreams and not understanding what those dreams are. They have a strong feeling of helplessness, and they're feeling sad. Most males, whether in middle school, high school, or college, are not very good at expressing their feelings. That's just a generalization. It's not a certainty. It's a generalization that most males are not very good at expressing their feelings. They're very good at expressing anger. Males are very good at expressing anger and frustration and various forms of that. And the anger is manifested through fear, anxiety, sadness, and helplessness. But these are feelings that are somewhat coming and going. And as a parent, we must understand and have some compassion into what's going on in the minds of our teens. But most importantly, what they really may be feeling is a sense of grief. And I felt validated earlier today because I sent this topic out about a week ago talking about mourning and loss, is that it's very likely that all of us are feeling a sense of grief, and that all of us are going through, we don't realize it, what grief is, because most individuals identify grief with loss of a loved one. I would like to take a moment real quickly. We had a member of our community, Joe Suriano, who was an educator for 50 years here in West Orange. He was a track coach, teacher. He was the parent and grandparent of two players, the grandparent of two of my players on the 14U softball team here in town, who came down with COVID-19, was literally last Saturday being allowed to leave the hospital, and 10 minutes later, unfortunately, went to cardiac arrest and didn't make it. And That's grief, that's loss. And most of us identify grief with that kind of loss. But it's important to understand as a parent that grief can come from the loss of anything we're attached to deeply. So in this circumstance, we're talking about teens who have played sports for the majority of their life, teens who are involved with musicals for the majority of their life, teens who played instruments over the course of life, teens who are involved with other pieces. And I'm sure that there are other clubs, other components that our teens are connecting, but these are the primary ones. So it is very likely what your teen is going through is a grief process and the loss of not being able to play spring ports, not be able to be on the stage to perform, not be able to sing. I know in our town, the musical program in our high school is remarkable. And every year we get excited to go watch. And those teens, in particular, the seniors who no longer have that opportunity, who no longer have that part of their life, the closure, the experience, it's gone. And in terms of sports, although many kids have the dream of going on and playing college sports, maybe even professional, the truth is most kids aren't going to college. And their senior year is a special year. It's a year that they get to hang out and participate and compete to the best of their ability. But we know why kids play sports, because it's fun. We know why kids are involved with shows and theater, because it's fun. We know why kids are participating in band competitions and marching competition, because it's fun. The second reason why I know kids play sports is because they're with their friends. Whether it's in theater, on the field, in their marching band, or in sports, we know it is part of their life. It is their friends. As a senior, to not have that experience is a loss beyond all comprehension. And we have to appreciate and begin to understand that what we're going through in our, not so much us, our teens, is very real. And our college students who are getting to the point to where you're supposed to graduate and the highlight, the pomp and circumstance, it's gone, it's over. There's no ceremony. There's no acknowledgement. There's no closure. And we have to understand that this grief is very real for our teens. And as we help them face this sense of grief, is they're dealing with loss. They're insecure. They're certainly uncertain. A lot of them are in shock and they're confused. This is not how it's supposed to be. This is not what they were told was going to happen. They were told, you follow the rules, you play by the rules, you get what you want. You study hard, you get good grades, you get into a good college. We are all in shock, frankly. This is not isolated teenagers, but for our teens, it's even more so. Remember, the brain does not fully develop until age 25. And if you're a parent, it's very likely that you're much older than 25, and so you have perspective. Yes, you hear the commercials and the PSAs, we'll get through it, we'll get over it. But to middle school, high school, and college teenagers, so what? They don't care. This is my life. It is egocentric ideology of an adolescent, teenager, college student, because it's all about me. Their world is crashing as they know it, and they're in shock. Now, as an adult, we have some perspective. We have the ability to understand, okay, I remember 9/11. I do. That was a scary time. This is different. I remember 2008 when everything crashed around us. This is different. There was a sense of some kind of certainty, a sense of cohesion, a sense of direction. Right now, none of us seem to know what's going on. And our teens who are connected are trying to figure it out on their own. We know that teens go to their peers for solutions and answers more so than they ever go to adults or teachers. That's just research-based. It's not because teachers and parents aren't there for them. They just feel more comfortable going to their peers, which is why they're on their cell phone, which is why they're texting, which is why they're on social media. But the truth is, The only way to truly get the help our teens honestly need, whether it's middle school, high school, or college, is through adult intervention and through parenting. And yes, it's very likely your teens are becoming big jerks, jerkier than ever been before. But I don't blame them. That's not part of the deal. That's not what they signed up for. When I go out and speak with my college students on campus, or I'm speaking to a bunch of athletes, I always ask them by a show of hands, who here asked to be born? The truth is, no one asked to be born. We didn't. Hey, please pick me. Somehow, some miraculous moment, we're born. We come into the life and we dealt the cards we're dealt with. But in this state, in this moment, what our kids are feeling is authentically very serious grief. They're dealing with loss of not so much a school year academically, although it is important to them. Don't think it isn't. Academically, it is important. A loss of friendships, a loss of memories, a loss of life experiences, and in this particular situation, a loss of sports, a loss of theater, a loss of concerts, and marching band competitions. And now they're even more insecure. It's tough enough being a teenager. I don't know one person who would go back and want to be in middle school or high school again. Maybe college, do things differently, but they are extremely insecure because adolescence in itself creates insecurity. The uncertainty is even more so. And we as parents have to somehow navigate that sense of uncertainty. Shock, absolutely. The shock is real, and I think it probably gets manifested more as a parent than it does as a child. I'm in shock. I know everybody I speak to, this is unbelievable. Who would have thought? And that shock is very real, and we have to be able to understand our own shock and accept our own shock in order to help our kids and teenagers deal with it. And lastly, they're very confused because what does it mean for the future? When will I get to go back to school? I thought life was X, Y, and Z. And if you have kids and teenagers who are involved with camp or summer sports or summer activities, they all want to know, will I be able to go to camp? Will I be able to play my summer sport? Will I be able to go to band camp this summer? And us as parents have to deal with the disappointment of saying, honestly, I don't know. Or better yet, every summer is a big family trip that you go to. And it's part of your regular traditions. And now you're thinking, will it happen again? And so it's very real in terms of what they're dealing with the grief. And if you're not, and I'm not an expert on grief, I want to be very clear, I'm not an expert on grief. I've gone through my own grief process in terms of my own personal loss. But there are so-called 5 stages of grief. That's important for us as parents to understand. So when we work with our teenagers and our kids, we can help them understand where they are in that whole so-called process. So as the diagram says here, you can see the grief. The first stage is denial. It's not happening. It's not real. It's not really right. And there's just a constant element in thought and feeling of denial. Then the next stage is anger. Conflict, anger. This is wrong. And I'm sure you've seen your child become angry. And maybe your child was somewhat pretty amenable, pretty easy, and now they've developed a short fuse. Yep, they absolutely have. Because they're angry. Most of our teens are smart, realize it's not your fault as a parent, but they need to be angry. They're angry at something or somebody because this is not what they expect. And then once they get past anger, there's an element of depression, significant sadness. And the stage after depression comes bargaining, where they try to figure out maybe this, maybe that. And ultimately, the last stage of grief is acceptance. In a normal situation, in a normal circumstance, adults, this takes months for a person to go through the grieving process. Depending on your religion, there are various mile markers that help you get through that grieving process. It's not something that takes a week. It's not something that takes a month. It often takes months to years to develop the ultimate goal of being in that acceptance stage where you can feel good and just move on. And our teens are not prepared to deal with the coping mechanisms of grief. As a matter of fact, What it's really like for your teens when it comes to grief is this. They vacillate back and forth between denial and anger. They deny it's happening and they get angry. Then after they get angry, they go back to denial. And they go back and it's anger, back and forth, back and forth. And maybe they'll go from anger to depression because they're sad and upset. And this could be the course of literally a day. Just one day, denial, anger, depression. But then, of course, hold on. I love when this happens. Of course, when this happens, it goes right back from depression to denial. And if you see this, there's a little triangle that develops. Denial, anger, depression, denial, anger, depression, denial, anger, depression, denial, anger, depression. Frankly, that's a very adult-like process to go through. But teens, they don't even realize they're going through it. And as parents, when our kids are upset or in denial, we have to allow them the grieving process. We have to. They are grieving a loss that is incomprehensible to us. It is something that is very real and significant, because if they spent the past 10 years as a baseball player, as a softball player, as a lacrosse player, or running track, and that was part of their identity and who they are, they no longer feel it's part of them. That part of their identity is gone. Or if they've been in theater and musicals since middle school, they always participated in the spring musical, and they're now in high school, and that's not there anymore. Their ability to comprehend and adjust to that is nearly impossible. In college, yes, maybe they didn't go to school as theater majors, but maybe they're doing on the side as a club, and they're connected. That's still who they are. They're playing intramural sports. That piece of them has not died. It has not left them, has not removed themselves into the reality of who they are. And so now they're home. No place to go, except for maybe outside for a walk. And heck, if you got a dog, your dog's loving it. But you're trying to figure out, who am I? Where am I going? How do I get there? And in this state of grief, being able to answer who am I without your attachment to a sport or an instrument or a show or a club is very difficult for teens to grasp about their purpose in life. Who am I? Where am I going? How do I get there? And so it's important to understand that we as parents are not limited, and we have a vital role to play with our kids. And I want to offer you some ideas and suggestions helping our teens cope with loss. First things first, if and when you're prepared, you want to talk about this, always ask permission to talk. The reason why I encourage you to ask permission to say, listen, you want to talk about it, is when they say yes, that permission allows you to ask questions. If they say no, don't be upset. Don't take it personally. Allow a chance to simply reinforce and say, listen, I'm here for you and I love you. And when you're ready to talk, I'm here. Because once they give you permission, they're open to the idea and the concept. And remember, in particular, if you have males are not necessarily easy to want to talk about their feelings. Females, and I'm generally stereotyping, are more apt to it. Doesn't mean they're easier, but in some situations, they might be more prone. Or better yet, there might be one parent where the teen is more comfortable speaking to. Don't take this personally. I know I don't. And yes, if you're the parent you're not chosen to, it absolutely does hurt. But it's not personal. So there's one parent that a child prefers to talk to, that's okay. But first things first is to ask permission to talk about whatever's going on. Do you want to talk about it? Yes or no? Next thing is, as parents, is allow them to feel whatever they're feeling. They want to feel angry? Great. They want to feel sad? Even better. They want to feel disappointed, concerned, frustrated? Absolutely. A lot of times as parents, we have learned that the only feeling we want our kids to feel is this concept of happiness and joy and elation. That if our kids are feeling happy and joy, that means that we as parents are doing something correct. We have helped condition and socialized our children that happiness is often a result of some kind of activity. A plus B equals happiness. And we have learned that in ourselves as adults as well, that we are only allowed to be happy if certain outcomes occur based on certain life choices. The truth is, happiness is a state of being. So if your child is upset, let them feel it. That's an important component. If they are angry, let them feel it. Let them feel angry, let them feel sad. Don't try to dismiss it or disregard it, because what you're trying to do is trying to allow them not to be human. I often mention in my conversations and workshops about the definition of happiness. And if you could choose as a parent to be happy, right? Is that something you would choose? If I could give you 365 days of happiness, would you want to take that gift? Like, yes, of course. Of course I want to be happy. My question then is, how will you know at day 195 that you're happy? And the truth is, we cannot appreciate what it means to be happy without experience what it means to be unhappy. And so we have to allow ourselves, and our kids in particular, to experience these various emotions of sadness and anger and disappointment, because that only enhances when we are happy. So please allow them to feel and don't disregard or dismiss their emotions. The other thing is understanding the difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is about feeling sorry for your kid. And yes, our kids would like for you to feel sorry. I often joke about pity parties, that our kids love to have pity parties, and they will invite anybody and everybody, and they want you to join them in their pity party. I encourage parents to have empathy, which is a little different than sympathy, because empathy is about being able to put your feet into another person's shoes. It is about empathy. It's about empathizing about what it might feel like to be them. Now, be very, very clear. This is not about, I know how you feel. So please, when talking to your teens, middle school, high school, college, do not say, I know how you feel. You will get smacked, screamed at, and yelled. And rightfully so, because the truth is, you do not know how they feel. Now, you can have empathy and say, imagine what it feels like is X, Y, and Z. But truth be told, none of us know what it's like to be an 8th grade student or a high school senior graduating now without necessarily playing your last home game with your friends, not being part of the last musical on the stage, or being a college senior now trying to figure out whether or not I'm going to have a job when I graduate without graduation. And frankly, you spent a lot of money on that college degree, and there's no closure, there's no ending. So to say, I know how you feel, please don't make that comment. Instead, say, it makes sense to feel that way. And I have said this every time in every workshop: acknowledge and validate. Let them know it's okay for how they feel. It makes sense to be angry. It makes sense to be sad. It makes sense to be frustrated. It makes sense to be scared. Anybody in your situation would feel that way. Let them know it's okay to feel that way, and there's nothing wrong with them feeling that way. Let them know that you acknowledge their feelings. Let them feel what they feel. Next, as a parent, avoid what we call the fix-it mentality. What is going on, our kids aren't broken. They're sad, and we as parents hate to see our kids hurt. I know I do. I've got 4, 25, 23, 14, 11, and it pains me when they're hurting. It pains me, and I have never understood the pain that I've ever felt more so than when I see my kids in pain. And I would love to fix it, but the truth is, it's not fixable. We cannot fix it. As a matter of fact, don't make promises, that cannot be kept. Don't make a promise that we'll all be better once this is all done. We don't know that. We'll get through this. Don't say we'll all be fine, we'll all go back to normal. The truth is, that's not a promise you can commit to. And as badly as you want to fix it, yes, and I have my wonderful 11-year-old daughter, when she falls and scrapes her knees, we put the Band-Aid on. She always asks me to kiss kiss the boo-boo, and she calls it magic. And I love it because I think I can fix it. But the truth is, what our kids are going through, our teens, middle school, high school, and college, you can't fix what's going on. It's impossible. So do your best to avoid the fix-it mentality and focus on what is in your ability to control. Next thing is, it's not going to help them to let them know that they're not the only one feeling this way. Sometimes we feel if we tell our kids, hey, you're not alone, others are feeling this way too. You'll get the big F you. You get the finger, you'll get screamed at, you get looked at. They don't care. That doesn't help them deal with their own feelings. They don't care that other people are going through this. What they do care about is how they feel and what's going on. So then what you ask is, how can I best support you? What do you do? What do you need from me? I love you. They might say, I don't know. They might really say, you know what? Get out of my room. Don't take it personally. Let them know. No problem. I love you. I'm here for you. I'll do whatever I can. But you need to ask them what is the best way that you can support them, whether it's middle school, high school, or college. These are conversations that have to take place. And when they do start talking, to get them to talk further, is use these 5 simple words. Tell me more about that. Don't be in the should business. You should do this, you should do that. No. Let's empower our kids. Let them understand that what they're going through is very hard. Yes, we'll get through this. This is going to have a lasting impression for the rest of their life. But tell me more about that. Tell me more about how you feel. Tell me more about what scares you. Tell me more about that. And finally, as silly as it might seem, if they're willing, offer lots of hugs, support, and ice cream. Yes, I do mean ice cream. I have yet to ever meet any teenager, male or female, angry and sad, to ever be placed in a situation where the bowl of ice cream is put in front of them. I don't know anybody who can eat ice cream and be angry. And I say this tongue in cheek. I've been involved with teens and youth sports and college athletes for a long time. I have worked with teenage and college students who have strong emotions and feelings. And the angriest of angry teens cannot be angry when eating ice cream. And parents who are frustrated and angry and overwhelmed cannot be angry when eating ice cream. It's physically impossible. And so when push comes to shove, I know in my family, I am the shake maker. I make chocolate shakes, coffee chocolate shakes. I even make smoothies. And for me, the greatest sound to hear is when my kid is drinking that shake. They go, that tastes good. And at the end, we hear that last bit of drink going up the straw and it's empty. Ice cream is huge. And right now, we could all use a big banana split with all kinds of ice cream to help us put things in perspective and come together over what really matters in terms of our life. And so there you have it. This week, we focus on parenting and disappointment. Next week, please join me for another webinar. We're going to change the diagram. We're going to change the paradigm here. We're going to go from parenting in the age of fear, parenting in the age of social media, parenting in the age of disappointment, to a little different approach, parenting in the age of resiliency, and helping your teen learn how to overcome challenges. That if you're here in New Jersey, we know that schools are closed now until May 15th. You're calling from New York City or from Pennsylvania, schools are closed for the rest of the year. Now's the time to think of ourselves of helping our kids become resilient and helping them overcome challenges over the course of the next few weeks. I want to thank you all for being part of this webinar. Tonight's episode and workshop is parenting in the age of disappointment, helping your teen mourn the loss of spring sports, concert musicals. My name is Coach Randy. I want to thank you all for being part of this important webinar series. Please stay safe, be healthy, and have a great evening. Take care.